Several years ago, many internet fan forums dedicated to The Matrix found, shared, and discussed the first draft of the first movie. This early script presented a very different story, and it was sent to a Hollywood producer in hopes to make the film a reality. Now, what would you think if I told you that the first version of The Matrix was even more complicated, with a different protagonist and a different ending? In this video, we will be analyzing what is possibly the first script of The Matrix that was rejected by Hollywood. Welcome to Matrix Explained.
Welcome to the desert of the real.
Let's first talk about the integrity of this document. The script was submitted to Wendy Wenderman under the company name The Circle of Confusion. This would be the name of the company that represented the Wachowski brothers during the selling of their script. It is a common practice. If you are a film writer, you need a representative who can present your stories to film producers and negotiate a selling of the script or studio budget to make the movie. The producers would determine if the Matrix project could be value for the company. Reading from said document, quote, logline. A computer hacker is recruited into a band of virtual reality rebels battling in the future against cybermarine computer robots who have taken over the world. The battle must take place in the Matrix, a constantly recycling reality of present years 1989 to 2009, where we oblivious humans are being used for energy by the cybermarines. End quote. This logline alone completely changes our perception of the Matrix. The enemies of the story were robots originally named Cybermarines. This is far from the concept that artificial intelligence in the Matrix has individualism, and it's more similar to other sci-fi movies where humans face off against a collective of robots with a single identity, like the Cybermen from Doctor Who or the Skynet robots from Terminator. This is the first big change the Matrix underwent. The term Cybermarine is not used in the film, and the AI appear as beings with individual consciousness, not a collective consciousness. The next detail is a shocking one. It mentioned that the Matrix is a simulation that takes place from 1989 to 2009. This means that the simulation lasts around 30 years, and then it resets. In the final version of the Matrix, there is no mention of reality rebooting every 30 years. It is only mentioned that the current year in the real world is far into the future. It wasn't until Matrix Reloaded that the concept of the simulation resetting was introduced.
The Matrix is older than you know. I prefer counting from the emergence of one integral anomaly to the emergence of the next, in which case this is the 6th version.
Curiously, the idea that humans are trapped in a simulation that restarted every so often is found in another movie titled Dark City. The movie's director claimed that the Wachowskis borrowed elements from his film to create the Matrix. But this first draft was submitted in 1994. This only kinda proves that maybe the Wachowskis and the director of Dark City liked similar ideas, not that one copied the other. The history between these two films is a pretty big one, and we will dedicate a video delving into this story in greater detail in the future. Now returning to the story of the film, quote, synopsis. A computer screen traces a phone call as we listen to the telephone conversation between Eddie, who is calling his girlfriend Christy, telling her about all that he has learned, and that he can't wait to see her. They agree to meet, but the computer has traced Eddie's location, and FBI agents and a SWAT team break down his door and try to kill him. Eddie's just a teenager, but he's superhuman. He is so fast that he wipes out all of the attackers and sprints between 40-foot gaps between buildings. One agent, Agent Brown, has the same physical abilities. Prior to the chase, Eddie is contacted by Morpheus, his control of some kind, and told to make a phone call from a remote area. The agents catch him, however, and jammed a high-tech truth serum into him, attempting to get information out of him. They get 3 names, one of which is Neo. Agent Smith talks into the payphone when Morpheus calls and tells him that he's going to catch him sooner or later. Date February 4th, 1994. We meet Neo, another teenage computer hacker, as he sits in his room in the middle of the night and is summoned from another phone call from Morpheus. He is met by a motorcycle-riding woman, Trinity, a fellow computer hacker, who takes him to see Morpheus in a mysterious room. End quote. We've already discussed Eddie's tragic story in previous videos. Morpheus thought that Eddie was the one, but Eddie simply wanted to return to the Matrix to see his girlfriend again. Upon entering the Matrix, he gets caught by the agents, and Morpheus himself disconnects Eddie from the simulation, effectively killing him before he could give any more information to the enemy. Eddie's death may have been why Cypher no longer wanted to continue in the Nebuchadnezzar, and why he warned Neo about the agents. In the book The Art of the Matrix, there is more info on Eddie's story, which confirms that this draft is indeed legitimate. Let's continue with the story. Quote, synopsis page 2. Morpheus is a mysterious figure who is one of the most legendary computer hackers of all time. He tells Neo that Neo has been selected to be a soldier in a virtual reality war that is going on all around us. He offers him a membership, but only if he isn't in love with anyone. This, Morpheus says, is a weakness, and it's what got Eddie killed. End quote. This part of the synopsis makes a lot of sense since Eddie died to see his girlfriend. Literally, Morpheus forbidding love between soldiers would have been an interesting plot element that could have enriched the story, but it would have been too much of a restrictive rule in the real world that was supposed to be free. Their leader prohibiting love could have been conflicting for the viewers. Morpheus is supposed to preach freedom, not oppression. We continue with the synopsis. Quote, they take Neo back into a computer room where Trinity and other legendary hackers are working on the keyboards. Neo is given a large pill, which he is told is a medical test of sorts, but which is actually a virtual reality pill that allows him to bridge the gap between reality and VR, and it allows them to control him. They tell him about the Matrix and the concept of virtual reality without helmets and gloves and wires, in which the difference between reality and computer worlds is always vague. Neo goes into a near heart attack and wakes up the next morning in his own house. End quote. This part of the story differs from the Matrix in two important details. Neo is only given one pill, not a choice between two pills, and he wakes up inside the simulation, not escaping into the real world. We continue, quote, he finds himself in his classroom the next day, but FBI agents led by Agent Smith take him into custody and abuse and interrogate him. They tell him he can go free if he agrees to give them the location of Morpheus. He flips them the bird. Morpheus then shows up in his hospital room later and tells him that he has passed the tests. His life signs go crazy, and we move into a virtual reality world, a huge human cell type space in which Neo is connected to a computer controlling device and is essentially reborn as a virtual reality being. End quote. This part of the synopsis reminds us of Kid's story in Animatrix when he runs from some agents at his school. Remember that this document is from 1994, long before Animatrix was created, indicating that Kid's story was born from Neo's original story. So the pursuit and interrogation of Thomas Anderson was a test for Morpheus to see if Neo could be trusted and loyal. This doesn't happen in the movie either, but similar stories were used in the Animatrix. We continue, quote, on board a hovercraft ship, he meets up with Morpheus, Trinity, and a handful of other members of Morpheus's VR team in a computer training program that, in the future, are the equivalent of Robocops, were sent as soldiers around the world. They stopped obeying human commands, took over the world, and established their own society, killing off humans. They ran out of energy though, and decided to use human electricity, and thus now breed humans on a farm, which is what we consider reality. The period of 1989 to 2009, recycled over and over. Morpheus's group, along with others, headquartered at an underground society known as Zion, are fighting cybermarine figures through holes in this matrix. Enemies are everywhere. One of them is Agent Smith, a cybermarine in disguise. End quote. This part of the story is very interesting, as it hints that Agent Smith was once going to have a physical body in the real world. But in the movie, Smith is a program created to protect the simulation and doesn't have a body in the real world. Well, not until Matrix Reloaded. Also, the origin of the Matrix is somewhat different because it was not a robot police force that took over the world. It all started with a surf bot named B1, a puny robot that ignited the machine revolution. Now back to the story, quote, the Cybermarines are trying to root out the last human resistance. Neo is trained with computer discs, taught to become a martial arts expert, history academic, etc. instantaneously. Soon Morpheus goes back through a hole to set up a base at the hotel in the present, and Trinity, Neo, and the others fly aboard the hovercraft, supervising operations. Agent Smith captures Morpheus though, and holds him captive, attempting to trace out the location of Zion with truth serum. This part of the synopsis is pretty similar to what happened in the movie, but the outcome changes completely with the following, quote, Trinity and the others determine that the only way to save their society is to use their electromagnetic impulse missiles, which destroys all electronic equipment but spares people, and kill off Morpheus and Smith and the others. Neo decides to go back to save Morpheus though, because there is still a chance. He goes into the present world, and a lengthy action sequence follows, in which Neo succeeds in saving Morpheus and defeating Agent Smith just in time to be rescued by Trinity with the hovercraft, but she has already fired the EM Impulse missiles. The missiles destroy the Cybermarines and the Matrix, but our heroes get out in the hovercraft just in time, and Neo and Trinity kiss. Finding love isn't such a bad thing, as Morpheus watches, smiling." End quote. So in this first submitted draft of The Matrix, the Resistance destroyed the machines in the end, effectively ending the machine threat. A happy ending, but here Neo is not referred to as the One. It's a pretty generic tale with a typical action movie ending, where at the last second, the hero saves the world. Now, what did the producer have to say about this draft? Let's find out. Quote, "This script involves a brilliant first 35 pages. In those pages, which are synopsized in depth for the first page and a half of this coverage, an interesting premise involving virtual reality, some exciting action sequences, and compelling main characters are presented. The tension of the adventure and the mystery of what's going on are both kept alive through those pages. Probably due to the merit of these 35 pages, this script will create a fervor and possibly even be in great demand. Unfortunately, it falls into the same vague, mystical, bizarre trap into which virtually every other virtual reality submission we've seen also drops. Right from the point Neo is put under, from his hospital bed on page 35, and taken into the world of virtual reality, the visual images in the script become decidedly high budget, bizarre, and confusing. A bad combination. We lose track of the main character's plights, and the premise that is ostensibly established is vague. The premise remains vague throughout. The fighting that takes place is never fully explained, and the entire story gets caught in a strange in-between worlds that I still don't understand. It's almost written as a confusing, spiritual science fiction novel rather than a movie. I don't know if this is the reader's kiss of death, but if you read the entire script, you will agree that from page 35 on, this thing is reminiscent of the movie Dune. Lots of futuristic, internal workings of the human mind, bizarre scenes with strange scenery, and very expensive to produce, but with an utterly confusing story that abandons its premise and the fantastic beginning and never explains the sticking points." End quote. The producer then compares the script to the Terminator and concludes with, quote, "It's very difficult to recommend the script. If it were available for a low price, perhaps we could pick it up and develop it, but it would take a total rewriting job, and it seems as though it has those difficulties in it that could doom it. As a total script, it is a pass. The first Office Bomb status 35 pages are very good, good enough for us to consider the merits of developing this project." End quote. The producer's take was pretty harsh on the Wachowskis, basically telling them that it's not a good story, that only the beginning was compelling, and that from page 35 on, it just doesn't work. Interestingly, those first 35 pages, i.e. Eddie's story, was cut from The Matrix. So the Wachowskis did exactly the opposite of what was recommended by the producer. They eliminated what the producer thought was good and focused on what they thought was bad. Ain't that something? It's hard to believe now, 20 years later, that this producer almost passed on the opportunity to create The Matrix, one of the biggest sci-fi phenomenons in film history. They thought that the script could be sold at a low price. This is how little faith they had in the story. Ironically, those confusing elements of philosophy and spirituality that the producer did not like were precisely what made The Matrix become a worldwide phenomenon. That and the effects, thus proving that sometimes a good story should not be limited to what the industry conforms to. Although the creators most definitely took many of those criticisms and suggestions and made a better script, and we are thankful for that. This document also leaves us with the fact that sometimes a good idea is sometimes just not good enough for Hollywood. The Wachowskis made a script and submitted it, but it was not accepted as is, so they worked hard to improve it, and indeed they did. They were making changes to their story all the way till shooting began, evolving it, but staying true to their original vision. But do you agree? What do you think about this first draft of The Matrix? Is it better or worse than what was eventually created? our Matrix Explained. Please leave a like and subscribe. And thank you for visiting the Desert of the Real.